A billionaire sat in his armored SUV, caught in a downpour that mirrored his emotional turmoil. Silent tears streamed down his face as he watched, through the rearview mirror, the closed gates of his estate. A caregiver he barely knew had brought light to his sick son's life, singing the same lullaby his late wife used to. What happened next would change their lives forever, revealing that the greatest riches can't be bought. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories every day. The billionaire observed the city through the panoramic windows of his penthouse. The lights below looked like tiny, insignificant specks, exactly how he viewed people, distant, replaceable, of no real importance. His fingers drummed on the marble desk as contracts for another billion-dollar acquisition awaited his signature. It was his fifth business empire, but the feeling of emptiness only grew. The phone rang for the 10th time that afternoon. It was the doctor again. The man took a deep breath before answering, his voice carefully controlled. "What's the final diagnosis?" "Unfortunately, we've confirmed it. It's a rare neurodegenerative condition, Batten disease, CLN2 subtype, with symptoms appearing early at age 4, which..." The specialist's voice droned on, but the billionaire was no longer listening. He hung up the phone, and for the first time in years, his hands trembled. The empire he had built, the political connections, the billions accumulated. None of it could save his son. After his wife's death during childbirth, the boy was his only true family, and now the sentence had been handed down. That night, the storm raged over the city. The billionaire drove his armored SUV aimlessly away from the mansion where medical teams were taking turns around the little boy's bed. The pain was unbearable. He parked at a scenic overlook with a view of the turbulent ocean and allowed the tears to finally flow, mingling with the sound of the rain pounding the vehicle. His phone vibrated, an alert from the mansion's security cameras. Automatically, he swiped the screen to see what was happening. His son's room appeared on the monitor. The nurse nanny had left, and to his surprise, the new housekeeper was there, a quiet woman he had barely noticed in the few weeks since her hiring. What he saw next chilled him to the bone. The woman approached the boy's bedside with careful steps. The billionaire narrowed his eyes, his body tense, ready to call security. But then, something unexpected happened. The housekeeper sat on the edge of the bed and began to gently stroke the child's fine hair. The child remained motionless, connected to monitors and machines. "Oh, what does she think she's doing?" he muttered, leaning in to zoom in on the image. It was then that he saw her open her lips and begin to sing. It wasn't just any melody. It was a specific lullaby, with a sequence of notes so peculiar that the billionaire felt as if a ghost had passed through his body. That song, it was the same one his late wife used to sing during her pregnancy, the same one he hadn't heard since she passed away. How could this stranger know it? The housekeeper's voice was soft and melodious, filling the sterile room with a warmth that contrasted sharply with the clinical environment. The billionaire watched, mesmerized, as a succession of emotions washed over him. Confusion, distrust, astonishment. And then, the impossible happened. The boy, who for weeks had shown no significant reaction beyond basic reflexes, slowly opened. His eyes, his small face, once expressionless, seemed to light up with a distant recognition. His lips moved slightly, as if trying to follow the melody. "My God," the billionaire whispered, his eyes fixed on the screen. The child's pale little hands rose tremulously toward the housekeeper in a gesture he hadn't seen in months. And then, like a cruel miracle in its subtlety, the boy babbled a few indistinct syllables. He who hadn't spoken since the first neurological symptoms appeared. The billionaire dropped the phone on the passenger seat and turned the ignition key forcefully. The tires skidded on the wet asphalt as he sped back home, his heart pounding against his chest. He didn't know what was happening, but for the first time in weeks, he felt something other than despair and resignation. Who was that woman, and how had she managed to do something that even the world's most renowned specialists couldn't do? The rain was still falling when the billionaire drove through the gates of the estate, parking abruptly in the main driveway. He dismissed the butler with an impatient gesture and hurried up the stairs towards his son's room, his footsteps muffled by the luxurious Persian carpet. He stopped at the door unnoticed. The housekeeper was still there, now telling a story in a low voice. She spoke about angels who never really leave. They just change form, while holding the boy's small hand. The boy didn't take his eyes off her, as if each word was a lifeline thrown into the abyss of his condition. "Who are you?" The billionaire's voice cut through the air like a knife. The woman jumped up in surprise, immediately moving away from the bed. "I'm sorry, sir. I asked who you are," he repeated, approaching with deliberately slow steps. "How do you know that song?" The housekeeper lowered her eyes. She was young, no older than 30. She wore the discreet uniform required by the head housekeeper, but there was something in her posture that didn't fit with a simple domestic worker. "My name doesn't matter, sir. I'm just the new cleaning lady. I saw the boy alone and decided to enter my son's restricted medical room, touch him without authorization, and sing a song that only my wife knew." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. The billionaire expected to see fear, guilt, or even a confession of corporate espionage. It wouldn't be the first time someone had tried to infiltrate his residence. But the woman's reaction was unexpected. "The song wasn't exclusive to her," she said simply, with surprising dignity. "And if you spent more time with your son, you would know that he calms down with melodies like this." The blow landed squarely. The billionaire felt his face flush. Who did this housekeeper think she was to judge him like that? "You're fired," he announced coldly. "Gather your belongings and leave before I call security." The woman nodded, resigned. She leaned over the boy and murmured something the father couldn't hear. Then she straightened up and walked towards the door. It was then that the child made a sound. Not a groan of pain as he had in recent days, but a call. A babble that sounded vaguely like "stay." The billionaire looked at his son, stunned. The boy's hands were outstretched towards the woman, his eyes wide with panic. "What did you do to him?" he asked, torn between suspicion and hope. The housekeeper stopped at the door without turning around. "Nothing your money can buy, sir. I just treated him like a person, not a patient." She left, leaving a deafening silence. The boy began to cry, a weak cry he hadn't voiced in weeks. The billionaire rushed to his son, trying to calm him, but the boy thrashed, reaching for the woman who had just left. That night, after months of constant decline, the boy slept with an almost serene expression. The father watched over his sleep, observing every breath, every twitch of his eyelids. And when dawn arrived, he made a decision that defied everything his business logic told him. He needed to find that woman again. "You did what?" The family lawyer, a middle-aged man with half a century of pragmatism etched into the wrinkles, around his eyes, stared at the billionaire in disbelief. The private meeting room, on the top floor of the corporate tower, seemed too small to contain his indignation. "I had them find her and bring her back," the billionaire repeated, following the movement of the hands on the Patek Philippe watch on the wall with his eyes. "She started working again this morning. With all due respect, this is insane. An unauthorized employee enters your son's medical room, violates all security and privacy protocols, and you rehire her. Have we even run a background check?" The billionaire took a deep breath, resisting the urge to dismiss the lawyer. After all, he was just doing his job. The same meticulous job that for 2 decades had protected his empire from con artists, opportunists, and industrial spies. "We checked. She's clean. Worked at a children's shelter for 5 years before coming to town. impeccable references. And the connection to your late wife? How do you explain the song? It was the question that had tormented him all night. The billionaire stood up, walking to the window that offered a panoramic view of the metropolis he had helped build. I don't know. And that's what intrigues me. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, visibly uncomfortable. Sir, given your son's situation, you're emotionally vulnerable. It's understandable but dangerous. I suggest we keep this woman under constant surveillance. It could be coincidence, or it could be something much more calculated. The billionaire nodded distractedly. In the past week, specialists from around the world had paraded through the boy's room, offering experimental treatments and increasingly grim prognoses. None of them had managed to elicit a reaction from the little boy, but it only took that stranger singing a forgotten song for his son to show more vitality than he had in weeks. The boy recognized her, he murmured, more to himself than to the lawyer. I don't know how, but he recognized her. Or he's reacting to the novelty, the lawyer argued. Children, even in conditions like his, sometimes respond temporarily to different stimuli. It doesn't mean hire extra security, monitor everything, do whatever you want, the billionaire interrupted, turning to face the lawyer. But she stays. Later that same day, the billionaire watched through the security monitors as the housekeeper calmly cleaned the hallway leading to his son's room. She worked with methodical efficiency, without looking at the cameras she knew were there. From time to time, she stopped in front of the medical room door, as if listening to something, before continuing her work. Why don't you go in? The billionaire muttered to the screen. What are you waiting for? The answer came when he realized that two strategically positioned security guards never left her side. The lawyer had been efficient in his precautionary measures. The billionaire picked up the phone and gave a short order. Pull back the security. I want to see what she does when no one's watching. 10 minutes later, the housekeeper was alone in the hallway. She finished cleaning the baseboard meticulously and then, with natural hesitation, opened the door to the boy's room. The billionaire held his breath, leaning toward the screen. His son was asleep, surrounded by monitors. The woman approached, silently, without touching anything. She just stood there looking at the child, and then, to the billionaire's astonishment, a tear ran down the housekeeper's face. It was genuine pain that he saw in those eyes, not the calculated emotional manipulation of a con artist, but something deep, visceral, and undeniably human. The billionaire turned off the monitor and leaned back in his chair, suddenly exhausted. Something told him that he was facing a mystery much greater than he had imagined. The first light of dawn filtered through the automatic blinds when the billionaire woke up with a start. He had slept in the armchair next to his son's bed, something he hadn't done since the early days of the diagnosis. His neck ached, and his mouth tasted of the stale coffee he had consumed in the early morning. Hours. The room was silent, except for the regular beep of the monitors. The boy was sleeping peacefully, more peacefully than he had in recent months. The medical team had recorded a slight improvement in his brain patterns overnight. Nothing significant, they cautioned, probably just a temporary fluctuation in his condition. Still, the billionaire clung to this fragment of hope like a shipwrecked sailor to a piece of driftwood. A soft sound of footsteps in the hallway caught his attention. He checked his watch, 5:47 a.m., too early for the nursing shift change. The door opened slowly, and the housekeeper entered carrying a tray. She stopped, surprised to see the billionaire there. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know you'd be awake." The man observed the tray, a cup of freshly brewed coffee, toast, and a small vase with a single wildflower. A simple breakfast, but prepared with evident care. "This is for me?" he asked, genuinely confused. The woman nodded, placing the tray on the side table. "You haven't been sleeping much. I thought you'd appreciate something warm when you woke up." She hesitated, then added, "I noticed you prefer your coffee without sugar. but with a drop of milk. The billionaire frowned, disturbed by the precise observation of his habits. He had always valued his privacy. The idea of being studied, even in such trivial details, bothered him deeply. "You observe a lot," he commented, picking up the cup. The aroma was comforting. "It's my job, sir, to be invisible, but to be attentive." Something in the simplicity of that answer disarmed him. For a moment, he saw beyond the uniform, beyond the employee. He saw a person, with stories, scars, and reasons of her own. "How is he?" she asked, looking at the boy. "The doctors say there's been a slight improvement in his brain patterns." The billionaire hesitated, then admitted, "It started after that song." The woman smiled discreetly, without comment. "Why do you care?" he asked abruptly. "It's just a job to you. Why bother singing to him, bringing me coffee?" She remained silent for so long that the billionaire thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but loaded with an unwavering certainty. "Because every human being deserves dignity, sir, especially those who are suffering." At that moment, the boy moved in bed, emitting a soft moan. Automatically, the housekeeper approached, gently adjusting his pillow. Her movements were precise, confident, not those of someone who just cleaned rooms. "You've taken care of children before," the billionaire stated, observing her. "Yes, at the shelter." She hesitated, then added, "Children in difficult situations, like your son." "He's not in a difficult situation," the man replied automatically, defensively. "He has the best medical care money can buy." "And yet he's alone most of the time," she retorted, with a boldness that took them both by surprise. A tense silence filled the room. The billionaire felt his anger rising. Who was she to judge his way of caring for his own son? He was about to put her in her place when he noticed something. The boy's hand had moved and was now loosely holding the housekeeper's finger. A small, almost insignificant gesture, but in his condition, monumentally important. "How do you do it?" he asked, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "How do you get a connection that not even I—" He let the sentence die in the air, unable to complete the painful thought. The housekeeper looked at him with a compassion that completely disarmed him. "Maybe because I'm not afraid to get close, sir. Pain is much scarier than death." The billionaire felt something break inside him. An invisible barrier he had kept erected since the diagnosis, maybe since his wife's death. He put the cup aside and, for the first time, really looked at the housekeeper. Not as an employee, not as a potential threat, but as someone who, for reasons still incomprehensible, seemed to genuinely care. "Teach me," he pleaded, the words escaping before he could contain them. In the 2 weeks that followed, an unlikely routine established itself in the estate. The housekeeper officially remained in her regular duties, but spent more and more time in the boy's room. The billionaire, in turn, began to rearrange his meetings and appointments, creating spaces in his schedule that were previously unthinkable. The doctors noted subtle changes in the picture. Nothing radical, they constantly warned, nothing that altered the terminal diagnosis. But the boy seemed more responsive, more present. Small gestures, a hand squeeze, a look of recognition, an occasional babble that sounded vaguely like words, became victories celebrated with contained tears. "Does she have any medical training?" the lead neurologist asked one afternoon, watching the housekeeper help the boy hold a spoon with jello. "Her methods are unusual but effective." The billionaire didn't know how to answer. He had never directly questioned the woman's qualifications. What he knew came from observation and fragments of conversations. She knew music, told stories that seemed invented on the spot, but that contained an ancient wisdom. She spoke to the boy as if he understood every word, not with the condescension of adults towards children, but with respect between equals. "She has something more valuable than training," he replied finally. "She has intuition." After the doctor left, the billionaire found the housekeeper in the sunroom, a rarely used space in the estate. She carefully watered the exotic orchids, murmuring something to the plants, as if talking to old friends. "You never told me your name," he commented, approaching. He then realized the absurdity of the situation. The woman had been taking care of his son for weeks, was changing their lives, and he didn't even know what to call her besides you or the housekeeper. She smiled without taking her eyes off the flowers. "You never asked." It was true, he realized with growing discomfort. For years, he had treated employees as replaceable cogs in his perfectly oiled machine. Names were superfluous. Functions were what mattered. "I'm asking now." The woman put the watering can aside and finally faced him. "I'd prefer we continue like this if you don't mind. Sometimes names create expectations, limitations. Without a name, I'm just who I need to be in this moment." The enigmatic answer frustrated the billionaire. When he was about to insist, the intercom in his pocket vibrated, an alert from security. He answered irritably, "What is it?" "Sir, there's a man at the gates. Says he's a lawyer from the shelter where your employee used to work. He insists he needs to speak to you urgently." "About her?" The billionaire looked at the housekeeper, who was still calmly tending to the plants, apparently oblivious to the conversation. "Send him in. I'll be in the office in 5 minutes." He hung up and was silent, watching her. There was something about her, a serenity that seemed unshakable, as if she carried a secret that strengthened her against any adversity. "There's a lawyer here to see you," he said finally. "From the shelter where you used to work." For the first time, he saw a flash of apprehension in her eyes. It was so brief that he almost doubted he had seen it. "I understand," she replied simply. "Do you know why he's here?" The woman placed an orchid back in its place with meticulous care before answering, "Probably to tell the story I should have told from the beginning." There was resignation in her voice, but also relief, as if a weight were about to be lifted from her shoulders. "What story?" "The story of a promise, sir. A promise I made to someone who is no longer with us." The billionaire felt a chill run down his spine. Suddenly, all the family lawyer's suspicions seemed validated. There was really something bigger happening, something that transcended the simple kindness of a dedicated employee. "You lied to me." "I omitted," she corrected gently. "And only because I knew the truth would push you away before you could see what was really important." "And what is important?" he asked, his voice hardening. The housekeeper looked in the direction of the room where the boy was resting. "That your son isn't alone in this world. He never has been." The billionaire's private office, with its austere decor and walls paneled in dark imported wood, had never seemed so suffocating. The lawyer from the shelter, a tired-looking man in an inexpensive but impeccably clean suit, sat uncomfortably in the Italian leather armchair, holding a worn briefcase on his lap. "Thank you for seeing me, sir," he began with nervous formality. "This is a delicate situation. We wouldn't normally interfere, but when we found out where she was working—" "Get to the point," the billionaire cut in, standing behind his desk. "Who is she really?" The lawyer opened the briefcase and pulled out a photograph. It was a simple image, 2 smiling young women embracing in front of a modest brick building. One of them, the billionaire immediately recognized as his housekeeper, looking younger and with longer hair. The other, the blood ran cold in his veins. "This is your late wife," the lawyer explained unnecessarily, pointing to the second woman in the photo. "Before she met you, she volunteered at our shelter for almost 2 years." The billionaire took the photograph with trembling hands. It was undeniably her. The same smile that had won him over at first sight, the same eyes whose light had been extinguished on the delivery table, taking with it part of his humanity. "This is impossible," he murmured. "She never mentioned—" "The two were inseparable," continued the lawyer. "Your wife helped with music lessons for the children. Your employee was our assistant coordinator at the time." The billionaire slumped into his chair, his mind trying to process this bombshell revelation. His wife, heir to a family fortune almost as vast as his own, volunteering at a shelter for underprivileged children. The woman he had met in the elitist circles of high society, who seemed so perfectly attuned to the world of privilege they inhabited. Why would she hide this from me? The lawyer adjusted his glasses, clearly uncomfortable. "It's not my place to judge your wife's reasons, sir. Maybe she had her reasons. What matters is what happened next." He removed another document from the briefcase, a newspaper clipping yellowed with age. The billionaire recognized the headline, "The car accident that had killed the biological parents of his adopted son, leaving him orphaned at just 6 months old." The accident that had led him to meet the boy during a routine public relations visit to the hospital and, inexplicably drawn, to the child decide to adopt him, to the surprise of everyone who knew him as a ruthless and emotionally distant businessman. "What does this have to do?" he began, but his voice failed when he saw the names underlined in the article. The boy's biological mother was one of the children at the shelter, the lawyer explained softly. "One of your wife's favorites. When she became pregnant, still a teenager, your wife supported her throughout the pregnancy, even after she was already married to you." The billionaire felt the room spin around him. Fragments of memories began to fall into place, his wife's frequent trips for charitable work that he had never questioned, the private calls, the overflowing emotion when he had casually mentioned the idea of adopting that specific orphan. "She knew," he whispered, understanding breaking like a wave. "My wife knew who the boy was all along." The lawyer nodded gravely. "She never had a chance to tell you. When she found out she was pregnant, she planned to reveal everything. The shelter, her connection to the boy's biological mother, everything. But then, she died in childbirth," the billionaire completed, his voice choked. "Taking our biological baby with her." A heavy silence hung in the office. Through the window, the billionaire could see the housekeeper, no, his wife's friend, walking slowly through the garden as if patiently waiting for the judgment to come. "And the song?" he asked finally, his voice almost inaudible. "Ah, the song." The lawyer smiled sadly. "Your wife and the boy's biological mother composed it together, for him, even before he was born. It was their secret, a promise that he would always be loved, no matter what happened." The billionaire closed his eyes, feeling the weight of everything he hadn't known, of all the invisible connections that had shaped his life without him knowing. "Why is she here now? Why not before?" "She tried," the lawyer explained. "When she found out about the adoption, she tried to contact you, but your assistants and lawyers blocked all attempts. A recently widowed millionaire, an adopted baby. You were an easy target for con artists and opportunists. After years of trying, she finally managed to be hired as a housekeeper, not to get close to you, but to fulfill a promise made to her late friend, to take care of the boy, if anything happened." The sky gradually darkened, foreshadowing another summer storm. The billionaire remained motionless in his office, even hours after the shelter's lawyer had left. The briefcase with the documents, photographs, and letters that proved the whole story was open on the desk, its contents spread out like pieces of a puzzle that finally fit together. The intercom buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. "Sir," the head of security's voice sounded tense, "the family lawyer is here. He says it's urgent." The billionaire sighed deeply. Of course, he would come. His security cameras must have recorded. The shelter lawyer's visit. Send him in. Minutes later, the family lawyer hurried in, holding a premium leather briefcase and wearing an expression that blended triumph and concern. "Sir, we have a problem. A big problem." He placed the briefcase on the desk, deliberately covering the shelter's documents. "We found out everything about your housekeeper. She's not who she says she is." "I know." The lawyer blinked, momentarily disconcerted. "You know? So you're already aware that she has a connection to your adopted son's biological mother? That this whole approach is part of a plan? Yes, I'm aware. And you're still keeping her employed? Sir, with all due respect, this is insane. Think of the legal implications. She could easily file for custody of the child, claiming an emotional connection to the biological family. Your shareholders are already nervous about your recent absences. If this leaks to the press..." The billionaire raised his hand, interrupting the flow of warnings. "Have you spoken to anyone about this?" The lawyer hesitated, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "Just preventative measures, sir. I put our legal team on alert, and I may have mentioned the situation to the board, just the most trusted members, without my authorization. It wasn't a question. It was my duty to protect your interests." The lawyer defended himself, straightening his posture. "This empire we built together, that I built," the billionaire corrected coldly, "could crumble if this story leaks the wrong way. Think of your son, a scandal of this magnitude at this stage of his condition." The mention of the boy's illness hit the billionaire like a physical blow. For a moment, all the anger he felt overflowed in a single violent urge to sweep the papers off the table. He restrained himself, only clenching his fists hard enough that his knuckles turned white. "What exactly did you do?" he asked, each word pronounced with cutting precision. The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. "A temporary restraining order. She won't be able to approach your son until everything is legally clarified. For safety, I also initiated the process of termination for cause. She should leave the property by the end of the day." Outside, the first thunder rumbled distantly. The billionaire stood up slowly, walking to the window. The housekeeper was no longer in the garden. "Where is she now?" "Being escorted to collect her personal belongings under security supervision. It's the standard procedure you yourself established for high-risk terminations." High risk? The words reverberated in the billionaire's mind. How had a simple woman who just wanted to fulfill a promise become a high-risk threat? "And my son, who's with him right now?" "The medical team, naturally. I gave specific instructions not to mention her departure. Children in that condition rarely notice changes in the environment anyway. The specialists guarantee that..." The billionaire never knew what the specialists would guarantee, because at that instant, the mansion's alarm system went off. Emergency lights flashed, and the intercom on his desk emitted a piercing signal. "Sir!" The head of security's voice sounded agitated. "The boy's having a crisis. The doctors can't stabilize him, and he keeps calling for..." The billionaire was already running through the hallways before the message even finished. Behind him, the family lawyer was shouting something about procedures and responsibilities, but his words were swallowed by the sound of the storm that was now raging, with full force over the estate. When he reached his son's room, the scene was chaotic. Doctors and nurses surrounded the bed, monitors beeped uncontrollably, and in the center of it all, the boy's small body was convulsing violently. "What's happening?" he demanded, pushing his way through the medical team. "Sudden neurological collapse," replied the chief neurologist, without taking his eyes off the monitors. "He was stable minutes ago, then he started calling for someone, became agitated when he didn't get a response, and now he called for her," the billionaire concluded, the understanding hitting him like lightning. From the hallway, he heard, shouting and the sound of a heated argument. He immediately recognized the voices, the housekeeper and the security guards escorting her out. He made the decision in a fraction of a second. "Let her in," he ordered, his voice overpowering the chaos of the medical equipment. "Sir," intervened the lawyer, who had just reached him breathless, "the court order. To hell with your order. My son is dying in there." When the housekeeper entered the room, something immediately changed in the atmosphere. It wasn't an instant miracle like in the movies. The monitors continued to emit alarms. The boy was still struggling. The doctors remained tense. But there was a subtle shift, as if a discordant note in a symphony began gradually to adjust. Ignoring the skeptical looks of the doctors and the lawyer's furious expression, she walked determinedly to the bed. Without asking permission, she sat beside the boy and took his trembling little hands in hers. "I'm here," she murmured softly. "I'm not going anywhere. Remember our story about the angels. They never really leave, they just change form." The boy's eyes, previously rolled back in their sockets, slowly focused on her face. The spasms didn't stop immediately, but their intensity visibly decreased. "Keep talking to him," instructed the neurologist, observing the monitors with growing interest. The woman then began to sing that same melody, the song that his wife and the boy's biological mother had composed especially for him. She sang softly, as if the song were a secret shared only between her and the child. Gradually, the words became clearer to everyone present. They spoke of protection, of a love that transcended distances and time, of promises that would never be broken. The billionaire felt warm tears slide down his face. He didn't bother to hide them. For the first time, he fully understood the meaning of that song. It wasn't just a comforting melody, but a legacy, a bridge between worlds that should never have been separated. Gradually, the monitors began to register more stable patterns. The boy stopped convulsing, his breathing normalized, and his eyes remained fixed on the woman who was singing. When the last note of the song dissipated in the air, the room was in complete silence except for the regular beep of the equipment. "Incredible," murmured the neurologist, examining the vital signs. "I've never seen such a direct response to emotional stimulus in cases like this. It's almost as if he recognizes her on a level that goes beyond consciousness," the billionaire completed, approaching the bed. "As if the bond between them predates the disease itself." The housekeeper didn't take her eyes off the boy, who was now holding her finger with surprising firmness. "I'm not leaving," she promised, both to the child and to the billionaire. "Not this time." The family lawyer, who was watching the scene from the door, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Sir, about the court order." "Cancel it," the billionaire ordered without hesitation. "Cancel everything. It's not that simple. There's a legal process, documents already filed. The board is already aware. Then complicate your life and simplify mine," the billionaire interrupted, turning to face his longtime advisor. "You created this problem. You're going to solve it. Hire whatever lawyers you need, spend whatever it takes, but I want that woman legally authorized to remain with my son by the end of the day. Do we understand each other?" There was an authority in his voice that admitted no contestation. The same authority that had built a global empire, that had closed billion-dollar deals, that had transformed entire industries. For the first time, however, that authority was not in the service of his business, but of something much more fundamental, the well-being of his son. The lawyer nodded rigidly and left without another word. The doctors, after completely stabilizing the boy, also left the room, murmuring among themselves about psychosomatic components and complementary therapies of emotional bonding that could be incorporated into the treatment. Finally alone, the billionaire, the housekeeper, and the boy who united them in ways they were only beginning to understand. A comfortable silence settled in the room. When I found out he had been adopted by you, the woman said finally, still gently stroking the sleeping boy's hand, I thought it was some kind of cruel coincidence. My friend's son being raised by her husband without knowing the connection. It wasn't a coincidence, the billionaire replied, sitting on the other side of the bed. My wife must have orchestrated everything. She knew I would visit the hospital. That day, probably manipulated the situation so that I would specifically meet this boy. She was always cunning like that, commented the housekeeper with a melancholic smile. Capable of moving mountains without anyone noticing her hand in the process. The billionaire contemplated his sleeping son. Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning? Why infiltrate as a housekeeper? The woman sighed deeply. I tried the direct route for years. Your security teams, assistants and lawyers blocked all my attempts, returned letters, ignored emails, refused visits. When I found out about his illness through a newspaper article, I realized that time was running out. I needed to fulfill my promise at any cost. The next morning dawned clear after the storm, as if nature itself reflected the clarity that was now established between the billionaire and the woman who cared for his son. During the night, while the boy slept peacefully, they talked for hours, no longer as employer and employee, but as two people connected by love for the same child. She told him about the years at the shelter, about her friendship with his wife, about how she had witnessed the birth of the boy and the promise made to the biological mother to always look after him. The billionaire, in turn, revealed the overwhelming loneliness after his wife's death, the instant connection he had felt with the orphaned baby during that seemingly casual visit to the hospital, and how adoptive fatherhood, although unexpected, had become the only genuine anchor in his life. Of superficial wealth. For years I wondered why I felt so drawn to him specifically, confessed the billionaire, watching the sunrise through the bedroom window. There were dozens of children in that hospital. Why him? Maybe some part of you recognized him, she suggested. Not consciously, but on a deeper level, he was important to someone you loved. The theory seemed fantastic, almost mystical, but strangely comforting, as if an invisible thread connected them all in a plot larger than mere chance. The family lawyer arrived early, visibly exhausted after a night of frantic legal maneuvering. He carried a folder of documents that he placed silently on the bedside table. It's done, he informed with professional formality. We cancelled the court order. Miss is officially hired as the boy's specialized caregiver with all the necessary medical and legal authorizations. He hesitated before adding, as for the board, I'll deal with them personally, stated the billionaire. They are concerned, sir. The stock price has fallen 2 points since yesterday. There are rumors in the financial press about your emotional stability and leadership ability. The chairman of the board suggested a temporary leave of absence until the situation normalizes. The billionaire smiled, a surprisingly serene smile for someone who had just heard that the empire he had built over decades was questioning his leadership. Schedule an extraordinary board meeting for this afternoon. In my office, not in the boardroom. I want them to see my son. Sir? The lawyer seemed genuinely confused. I don't understand how that would help the situation. Exposing the boy's condition would only confirm the concerns about your current priorities. Exactly. When the meeting happened hours later, the billionaire surprised everyone. Instead of defending himself or negotiating, he simply presented his decision. He would take a 6-month leave of absence from the CEO position, not by imposition of the board, but by his own choice. My son, he declared to the perplexed executives, has a terminal condition. The doctors give him between 6 months and a year. During most of his life, I delegated his care to professionals while building more wealth than 10 generations could spend. I won't make that mistake again. A stunned silence followed his words. Never in the entire history of the company had the billionaire spoken of personal matters, much less of feelings or regrets. "What about the new projects in Asia?" asked finally one of the directors. "The European expansion, the government contracts that depend on your personal influence." "They'll survive without me," he replied simply, "or they won't. Either way, I won't be there to see it." The news of his temporary departure, as predicted, shook the markets. Stocks plummeted. Analysts prophesied the decline of the empire. Competitors celebrated prematurely. The billionaire watched everything with a surreal detachment, as if that world that had previously consumed every inch of his being was now nothing more than a distant and slightly boring spectacle. His days took on a new rhythm, centered not on meetings and acquisitions, but on the small daily victories of his son. The first clearly articulated word after weeks of silence. The first spontaneous smile upon hearing a story. The first time he managed to hold a toy without help. Moments that no fortune could buy, but that suddenly seemed worth more than all his assets combined. The housekeeper, now officially a caregiver, but in practice much more than that, became a constant presence, transforming the cold estate into something resembling a home. Under her influence, the billionaire learned to participate in the most basic care of his son, feeding him, changing him, bathing him. Tasks that he had previously delegated entirely to professionals now revealed themselves as portals to an intimacy he had never imagined possible. "Do you think he knows?" he asked one night after managing to make the boy laugh with a simple game. "About all the past, the connections?" The woman observed father and son with an enigmatic smile. "Some truths don't need to be explained," she replied softly, "just felt." 6 months turned into 9, then into a year. Defying all medical prognoses, the boy not only survived, but showed small, incremental improvements. The disease was still present, relentless in its degenerative nature, but its advance seemed slowed down, as if something beyond science was interfering in its destructive course. "I wouldn't say it's a miracle," the neurologist carefully explained during a routine checkup. "But there are factors that medicine doesn't fully understand yet. The emotional environment, the quality of human interaction. These elements can alter genetic expressions, strengthen the immune system. What you've created here, this core of intense and constant care, is making a difference." The core to which the doctor referred had evolved naturally over the months. The billionaire, the caregiver, and the boy now formed an inseparable unit, an unconventional family united by invisible threads from the past and by the stubborn determination to extort every precious moment from the present. The estate had also transformed. Once a monument to power and ostentation, it now focused entirely on the boy's needs. The main medical room was converted into a welcoming space that blended hospital equipment with elements of a typical nursery. Toys, books, and simple musical instruments shared space with monitors and medications. The walls, once an austere white, now displayed colorful murals painted personally by the billionaire, a skill he had rediscovered after decades without practicing. In the outside world, his empire had survived the initial turbulence of his departure. Ironically, the publicity surrounding his decision to prioritize his sick son had humanized his public image, transforming the perception of ruthless tycoon to devoted father, a change that surprisingly translated into brand value for his companies. "They want you to star in a commercial about family values," the lawyer commented during a rare visit with a touch of irony. "Decline," replied the billionaire distractedly, focused on helping his son assemble a simple puzzle. It wasn't just the boy's physical condition that showed improvement. His personality, previously hidden under the fog of the disease, gradually emerged, determined, curious, and with a surprising sense of humor for someone so young and with so many limitations. On a sunny spring afternoon, as the billionaire pushed his son's adapted wheelchair through the garden that now bloomed with species chosen especially for their vibrant colors and interesting textures. The caregiver approached with an unusually solemn expression. "I received a letter from the shelter," she announced, sitting on a nearby bench. "They found something among the biological mother's belongings, something she asked to be given to him when he turned 5. The billionaire stopped the chair in the shade of a flowering magnolia tree. "He turns 5 next week." The woman nodded, extending a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. "I thought that maybe we could open it together." The billionaire hesitated, feeling a pang of insecurity. Although the months of living together had dissolved any resentment or distrust between them, moments like this still reminded him painfully that his son had roots that didn't include him. "Do you think he'll understand?" "Maybe not intellectually," she replied softly, "but some things are understood by the heart, not the mind." They opened the package together, with the boy watching curiously between them. Inside was a worn notebook and a small handcrafted music box, simple but beautifully carved. The notebook contained diary entries from the biological mother during her pregnancy, hopes, dreams, and fears of a teenager who knew she couldn't raise the child she was carrying, but who loved him desperately. The last pages contained letters addressed to the child for different ages. The billionaire read aloud the letter marked for age 5, his voice choking as he conveyed words written years before by a young woman he had never met, but who now seemed strangely present. "My little miracle, wherever you are, know that you have never been alone. I put angels in your path even before you were born, people who would love you when I couldn't be there." As he read, the caregiver opened the music box. The melody that began to play was exactly the same song she had sung at that first meeting in the room. The song that the billionaire's wife and the biological mother had composed together. The boy, recognizing the melody, smiled and tried to sway his body to the rhythm. His eyes shone with an understanding that transcended his condition. "The angels never really leave," murmured the caregiver, repeating the words of her story. "They just change form." The billionaire watched his son, then the woman who had entered their lives to fulfill a promise. At that moment, he felt part of something much larger than his financial empire had ever been, an unbroken chain of love and care that had begun even before the boy's birth, and that would continue in some way even after he was gone. "This is our new mission," he said finally, placing his hand over his son's, "not just to prolong his days, but to fill them with everything that matters, so that when the time comes, he knows he was loved by more people than we ever imagined." The caregiver nodded, wiping away a silent tear. "That's what I came for, and that's why I'll stay." Under the flowering magnolia tree, with the music from the box filling the spring air, they allowed themselves something that no terminal diagnosis could diminish: the imperfect fullness of the present moment. The billionaire's empire would continue to exist somewhere beyond the walls of the estate. Stocks would rise and fall, contracts would be signed or lost. But none of that really mattered. The real fortune was there, between them. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day.